4 o'clock officially, so we are going to go ahead and begin. So again, this is our final scheduled budget workshops. We're excited for that. We still have some work to do, obviously. After that, we'll come back for public hearings and for final adoption of the city council in the future, in the coming months. But excited to be here with our fire department, going over theirs, as well as city hall, the mayor admin, and city council budgets, and then also some final discussions on property tax, general fund revenue and expenditures, and then city projects to get feedback from the council on that. And any question and answers, the council discussion, and also some closing remarks from Mary Lynn and next steps from here. So with that, to Mary Lynn, and she can turn it over, I guess, probably just straight over to the fire department. So unless there's anything you want to add before we turn it over to fire.
There is not anything, so I'll pass it over to Daniel.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Hold on 1 second.
Call the roll. Call the roll.
Going rogue. Counselor Doty.
Here.
Counselor Static.
Here.
Counselor Register.
Here.
Counselor Williams.
Here.
Counselor Allgood.
Here.
Counselor Dittenber.
Here.
Good. They are all here and accounted for. Okay. Now, Chief Daniels.
Take two. Mayor and Council, thank you very much. We're going to deliver this as quickly as we can. Starting with our budget proposal, I just want to highlight the picture on the front page there. That was from our hose coupling ceremony at the Notice Fire Station. That was a great accomplishment. Just thank you all for your support and your ongoing support for public safety. We turn the page, get to the organizational chart. As Councilor Static pointed out earlier, we did change that picture pretty quick. And we are currently recruiting for a vacant Deputy Chief of Administration position. Some of our accomplishments just to highlight for council, the mayor, and the public. Since 2024, we've purchased 3 new fire engines, the last one to be delivered this August, 2 new squads as well arriving, one will be arriving this August as well. We've established the reserve and training apparatus, something that Caldwell Fire really hasn't had in the past. Sometimes when these apparatus break, we didn't have anything to go into. We've modernized station alerting systems and dispatching procedures. We've secured the training grounds and the joint venture with Caldwell Police with the Public Safety Training Building. We've established a new baseline wildland training program thanks to our newly created training division with Chief Ritchie here at the table. We've implemented asset tracking and maintenance programs for all divisions, kind of taken a more proactive approach at apparatus repair and maintenance, and really engaging in preventative maintenance, I should say. We've launched a new water rescue program with a new rescue boat, which was purchased this year. Heavy rescue equipment was purchased in April 2025 thanks to the council's support and placed on Truck 11. And I spoke about our training division, and we just completed our strategic plan that some council members were involved with. And we'll be releasing that plan along with our standards of cover and station location analysis by the end of this fiscal year. Turning the page, going into our department overview. Plainly, we all know that Caldwell is growing exponentially. One of the fastest growing cities in the state, if not the nation. And to keep up with the increasing number of emergency calls, build out of our neighborhoods, commercial footprint, industry, we must invest now to ensure safety in our community. As Chief Ingram said a couple of weeks ago, a safe community is one that thrives. And when businesses feel safe and people feel safe, they move here and they bring their businesses here. Right now we're a little understaffed and we're a little understationed, and I know the city is working on fixing or correcting those numbers. Chief Shoup's going to talk about our current snapshot.
So currently with the city population of around 76,000, and then we still add into our rural population on top of that, we are covered by 4 fire stations, 3 of them being in the city of Caldwell and 1 being out in Notice in the rural community. In those 4 fire stations, we have 3 fire engines, 1 ladder truck, 2 squads, and 1 battalion chief, and that's on duty every day. They are staffed by between 16 and 22 firefighters. 16 personnel is our minimum daily staffing and 22 is our maximum daily staffing. We handle out of those 4 fire stations around 8,200 calls a year. So when we look at that, that is 65% medical and 35% fire. And when we look at the numbers, 8,200 calls is how many incident numbers we have. That doesn't account for multiple unit responses on calls, which if we do unit responses, we're sitting at 10,400 responses.
Thanks, Chief. Jumping down to the ISRB ISO rating. The ISRB is the Idaho State Ratings Bureau, which on a scale of 1 to 10 determines what our taxpayers or our homeowners pay for their home insurance. And right now we're a 3. 10 is the worst, 1 is the best. Given our current trajectory and the investments that we're making with the city, I envision by next year us being a 2. That's our goal anyway. Now what that translates to is that we are the only department that when we grow and expand and increase capacity and have well-trained firefighters, we can actually save our residents money. It's a reduction in their property insurance, but it requires some investment. Some growth drivers, just talking about the new construction, projected call volume increasing, some things that we're asking for. We need to start thinking and planning for staffing Station 4. Rather than open a fire station or hire all 12 people at once, we need to onboard those personnel, get them trained, have some leadership, understand our city, understand the dynamics of Canyon County. So when we do open the doors at Station 4, it is operational on day 1. We're also trying to address some coverage gaps to the north and south. And the other driver for growing our department are some of those traffic patterns that we witness out there every day on our streets. Travel times, route times really make a difference when you're talking EMS and fire runs. The quicker we can get there, the better. Chief Ritchie will go over some training points.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor. With the bond passing on the ambulance, you think that ratio is gonna go down, 65 medical versus fire?
That trend stayed fairly consistent in the 50+ years that we've been doing fire and EMS care. So if you look at the trend even over the last 5 to 10 years, that ratio has really been the same. It's just the number of calls, the overall call volume increases, but the ratio between fire and EMS tends to stay the same.
The reason I'm asking is because if the ambulance service can get there quicker than you guys can, perhaps our costs might go down a little bit.
Correct. They will cancel us if they get on scene first, and then we do not need to continue in because they can handle the patient. Due to the patient size, complexity of the call, that can adjust some of the needs of us still to respond, but if the ambulance does not need us, they do cancel us.
Do you know how many vehicles they're gonna add and personnel?
They do not.
Thank you.
Chief Ritchie.
Right, in our goal to have the best trained firefighters in the valley, we've done a number of things to enhance our training through hands-on delivery, as well as technologies coming into place. So we're going to be having an enhanced learning management system, which is going to provide a much better tracking system for training, as well as getting additional training to firefighters in the station to limit traveling throughout the city. But some highlights of what we're enhancing in training right now, we're having increased frequency of live fire drills and hands-on training. That's been enabled by myself coming on board and Captain Trotsky assisting. We're also expanding our officer training and our leadership training so we can develop the next generation of fire captains and battalion chiefs. And then finally, we're going to be expanding our EMS training and certification, including continuing education to meet today's standards and stay up to par with what we need to be.
Continuing with recruitment and retention, we have undergone some significant changes in our compensation structure, and we've become a destination fire department. We're actually able to recruit personnel from other agencies to come work for Caldwell Fire, and that's, I think, a first in Caldwell's history. Favoring into the retention category, having that in-house training, having the live fire simulation, having the succession plan in place to train our personnel in-house really keeps that investment here in Caldwell. We want to continue doing that. Chief Perry, did you want to talk about fire prevention?
Yeah, so overall, the Fire Prevention Bureau is fully staffed right now. We're meeting all of our mission objectives within the city and county space. We are focusing, and continue to focus on leveraging strategic data, data analysis for future growth of our educational programs. So everything is data driven. We're not focusing on areas that maybe don't need the focus that we're providing. We're going to expand our community education programs through schools and local organizations. And then overall, we've been able to, because we are fully staffed and our individuals are certified in the areas that are required for the job, we've changed the budget to more of a maintenance budget instead of a growth budget. And with that, we've been able to reduce some of the training, equipment, and technology. Overall, I've been able to reduce our expenditures meeting the county or meeting the city's request. So fire prevention is good.
That's good. A topic I've heard, or a question we've heard over the past few budget workshops is how is your department funded? And primarily we're funded through property taxes, but we're one of the few departments that has a few other funding mechanisms. One of those is impact fees. We're using some impact fees to fund Station 4 and purchase Engine 14 entirely. We do generate some revenue from the rural district agreement, the staffing, and the fire services agreement generate around $3 million for the fire department. $1 million of that roughly this next fiscal year will go towards staffing. But $2 million of that is revenue for the fire department or the city to be the rural district's fire department. And that includes the unincorporated areas of the rural district, Notice, Greenleaf, and Houston. We also, as Chief Perry alluded to, fire prevention is almost completely funded from developer fees. We are in the process of applying again for the SAFER grant. We were a SAFER grant recipient, which ends in February of next fiscal year, or I'm sorry, this fiscal year. No, next fiscal year.
Next fiscal year.
February of '26, and we're hopeful that we're going to be considered for that, again, to offset some costs for personnel for Station 4. There's also some special revenues, as you're aware. We were able to capture just over $100,000 when we sent our fire engine to California. Those dollars, I'm told, should be coming in by the end of the month. And we do have some independent billings, things like standby and nuisance alarms and state agreements for hazmat call-outs. Getting into the meat and potatoes, on the next page, our budget requests are as follows. Personnel, we're looking to add 1 EMS training captain and 3 suppression captains. The 3 suppression captains are meant to start developing those leadership roles for Station 4. Station 4 should be operational by 27 or 28, and please don't put us on or ask us for an exact date on when that station will open. But we want to start grooming those individuals to be company officers for that station when it does open. That also helps offset some of the overtime at the captain's rank, which is our most saturated rank in overtime. In addressing the EMS training captain position, we identified some failure points in our EMS programs last year. We had some liabilities and some exposure that we needed to address, and that's through training and some certification processes that we wanted to bring back in-house rather than partner with Nampa Fire District on. So we'd rather spend those dollars here. Professional services, I'll let Chief Shoup touch on Canyon County Sheriff's Office.
Okay, so under the professional services line item, the one item that's in there is the Canyon County dispatch agreement, which is $100,000. And the purpose behind this is the increased costs with the dispatching center, but it also, we're getting deliverables, and by creating an actual expectation and a contract under and line item each of these deliverables out, we can then utilize that to our benefit, which is what we are doing now. we're not getting the full extent of it, but they've been doing a lot of due diligence to try to help us out the last year. It's now just getting to the point where it's getting more expensive. So we are able to adjust our run cards with a simple phone call. Instead of having to say your cards are what your cards are, we're able to adjust the run responses per incident type, per unit type to our agency. It's not just a generic run setup. We're also, they're managing a lot of the station alerting systems that we have just put in, which is reducing dispatching times from taking the call and dispatch to alerting the crews. That time is decreasing because of the new digital system that's been put in place. We are also going to hold them to NFPA 1225, which is a national standard under the fire service for dispatching criteria, which is going to help us out with out the door times, call taking times, high priority call times that are going to require a certain level of dispatching to be done within certain time frames. So it's going to speed our response up by reducing the out the door times. And then also a lot of our push is to also get a dedicated fire and EMS dispatcher so that they're not multi-disciplined, not having to do police, fire, and EMS. We'd be able to have a dispatcher dedicated that knows our systems specifically to all those that are using that dispatcher. Next one is equipment and tech. So we put in there the switching from tough books to iPads, and the current tablets that sit in the front of the fire engines that we have to use to be able to click and route and be able to do our get our CAD data from. Those are $4,500 a piece, and we have one in front and we have one in back because that's how they do their patient care reports. The screens on them to replace them are between $1,000 and $1,500 a screen, just for the screen. We are wanting to switch to an iPad, which is between $500 and $800 for the whole new iPad. It doesn't have near the IT impacts and complications, and it has better GPS tracking and it has better operability. With some of the changes in the technology that has now come into place that we're completing here in the next couple months, we will be able to use an iOS or an Apple system with better tracking systems and actually take away that expense of the tablet and go to just an iPad. So a $500 iPad in the back going into houses for calls is a lot better than a $4,500 tablet that can break. So there's a lot of advantages to switching this. So there's a little bit of an upfront cost, but overall it's going to end up reducing our overall costs in the long term. The next one is replacing the dual compliant wildland rescue coats. That is, a lot of our wildland gear is starting to expire because there's a shelf life on them. This is a dual compliant coat that allows us to do extrications and reduce the wear and tear on our personnel. So they're not having to put on the heavy turnout coats when they're doing extrications out in the field, and then they're able to dual roll them for both wildland and extrication. The PPE replacement or turnout gear replacement, that is just a standard replacement for all of our structural gear. Again, it has a shelf life as well. And so that's just meeting that standard rotational process for that. And then the new PPE extractor for Fire Station 2. Those are very specific washers that are geared specifically for turnout gear to wash and remove the contaminants out of the gear. And that's replacing that. Any questions?
The next category is compensation adjustments. While we have nearly finished negotiations with our labor group, we have budgeted for similar COLAs and merit-based increases across the board for all fire department employees. We've also reclassified a number of employees in administration and fire prevention, which we'll touch on here in a minute. We eliminated a part-time office staff member and distributed that workload into our current administrative coordinator, which triggered the reclassification request. Going into capital requests, Chief Ritchie will touch on some of those.
Yeah, requested $700,000 to invest in the public safety training site. That'd be $150,000 for perimeter fencing to secure the site, $150,000 to extend the water main into the training grounds and put a hydrant system in to ensure realistic training operations. And then finally, within that $700,000, $400,000 for materials and containers to build out the site. With significant cost savings over having that contracted out, utilizing our personnel to do that construction. Additionally, we're asking for $50,000 for furnishings for that public safety training building. The classroom will be shared with PD. And then finally, $75,000 for a telehandler, which will assist in building the training site as well as allow for ongoing maintenance and training.
Continuing on with capital requests, there's $550,000 slated for the logistics facility. And this is a metal building that will help with storing firefighting equipment, tools, fire hose, turnout gear, pretty much everything that we have in our stations that we just do not have space for. And the reason why we're proposing the logistics building is it's not only gonna store tools, equipment, but we can literally do bulk buying for station supplies and keep it on hand and reduce our overall cost because we have it on site instead of having to buy a little here and a little there. The other advantage is we're able to store all of our training apparatus down on site, so they have them right there and it's out of the weather. Secures it because it'll be heated, so we're not gonna have to worry about freezing in the cold temperatures. And it would also give us the ability to store some of our reserve apparatus down there so that we're not clogging up all of our fire stations with reserve apparatus. The downside is the number one risk in the fire service for injury is backing accidents. And that we have a high potential for those right now because we're having to back fire engines into fire stations. By taking those reserve apparatus and putting them into the logistics storage center, we would then have the ability to keep those pull-through bays, and then when we need them, we would go down and get them and rotate them out. The other thing we also considered is by trying to expand the fire station 1 to meet the space requirements for this, that we're gonna be able to gain out of this logistics building, you're looking at a cost between $600 and $800 a square foot because of the real estate site and the cost of the building, because it's more expensive down there. Whereas if we do a very simplistic metal building, we can build it for around $150 per square foot and dramatically reduce the cost. And there's just not the space at the Station 1 site to make a facility large enough to do what we need to do for the growth of the department. And then lastly is the $65,000 for equipment, and this is to finish standardizing all the fire apparatus equipment on all of it, so every one of them is universal, and also to finish out the Truck 11 specialized technical rescue equipment that we've worked on a phased approach.
Mr. Mayor? Yes. Professional services on the dispatch side of that, how many cities in Canyon County participate in that now? Do you know that?
At Canyon County Sheriff's Office,
All the smaller cities like Greenleaf, Parma, do they participate in that cost?
Greenleaf and Notice are already underneath Caldwell Fire, so yes. Parma
Do
participates.
they give you money for that, or where does the money go for
It would
that?
be through.
That would be part of the fire services agreement. They already pay us the $2 million. But our contribution for dispatching resources is that $100,000. Departments like Wilder, Parma, Homedale, I don't know if they contribute or not.
And then the other.
Was that brought up in, who was on, were you on negotiations? Was that brought up in negotiations as far as, you know, making sure that everybody pays their fair share?
It was brought up in the discussion with the Sheriff's Office captain over dispatch, and that there are other agencies that are getting similar expenses. We run more calls than they do, so it's based off of a call volume, but they are getting similar expenses that are occurring to them.
What about Napa, what do they pay, do you know?
It's not confirmed, but it's a couple $100,000.
Does Greenleaf pay anything?
That's part of the rural agreement that we have.
On the surface, they don't pay anything, no? Okay, thank you.
Jumping into compensation adjustments, or were we there? No, updates to PPE and facilities. $20,000 requested next fiscal year for Fire Station 2 kitchen updates, which hasn't been updated since the station was built. $40,000 gym equipment update just to bring the rest of the equipment to speed throughout the department. And then $76,000 is requested for onboarding of personnel in the form of capital requests for equipment, tools, PPE for those new personnel and to include a computer for the EMS cap. That's if the positions are, will need those additional funds. Turning the page to fiscal year 25 versus fiscal year 26. You can see in the left column or the middle column our budgeted requests or our budgeted dollars from fiscal year 25 and our requests for fiscal year 26. The largest increase is in personnel, and that's for a number of reasons. The first, I want to point out, as mentioned earlier, we are assuming the cost of the SAFER grant program effective February 26. And so that's a pretty significant impact to the tune of around $650,000. Essentially, we are assuming paying for those 6 additional personnel without adding personnel to our rosters. We've also increased overtime amount. It takes into consideration the COLA allowance, the addition of 4 personnel, the merit-based increases, as well as reclassification of several personnel. Operations went up about $23,000. Buildings went up from $218,000 to $282,000. We've assumed a little bit of a new role in maintaining the property at 621 Cleveland. As well, we have identified some maintenance needs for our Fire Station 2 to replace the HVAC system. We need to replace computers throughout the organization as well. We need to start paying attention to our parking lots and our masonry, which is starting to show its age in some of those areas. And rather than be reactive to some of those repairs, we'd like to be a little more proactive with some preventive maintenance. On the prevention side of things, the largest jump there is for personnel. That's due to a reclassification or a salary structure change to the prevention division, but the prevention operations has been reduced by over $30,000, partly in consideration of the mayor's request that we reduce training and meeting budgets, travel and meeting budgets by over 10%, which we've achieved. And the last page is we look ahead to fiscal year 27 through 29, our priorities. Again, for Station 4 staffing, you can expect us to ask for 9 additional personnel next fiscal year to complete staffing for Fire Station 4. A lot of that may or may not change based on SAFER funding availability. We're going to come forward and ask for support staff for logistics as our department grows. I know that the council and the mayor like more boots on the ground, but we need those support personnel in place to help with the mission of making sure that they have the tools and equipment they need. We're going to start planning for Station 5 in the northeast corner of Caldwell, Midland 2026 area. We actually just had a discussion this morning about a piece of land that's been identified from Brighton Homes, and we'll begin planning for the 6th fire station pending the Farmway development with the commercial footprint and residential impacts there. Fiscal year 28 priorities.
Chief, if we had to assume all 9 additional personnel for Station 4, the SAFER grant isn't available, and we'll keep our fingers crossed and say a prayer, but ballpark that for me.
2 million would be my figure. That's a safe figure for staffing a fire station just with
Is it
personnel.
safer?
No, that's a safe figure. That's a safe figure for staffing personnel at a fire station.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you know, one thing, Chief, we want to get back in the corner like START is they have enough money to build the station, but nobody demanded.
Right.
Any comments on that?
Well, we're in a little different environment, of course. We are going through a new impact fee assessment, and we're identifying some revenues in our capital improvement plan. We can look at different ways to capture dollars, but again, those are one-time figures. And I know that the council's got some tough decisions to make. The last thing I think that we would like to do is build the fire station and have it empty.
We just wanna be ahead of the game so that doesn't happen, is
Right.
my point.
And our phased-in approach at this is rather than ask the city for 12 personnel at once, we would like to phase in the hiring plan. Fiscal year 27 could look something like we could hire 3 in the first quarter and then maybe the last 6 in the latter part of the year. Our budget requests are going to go up and they're going to increase. And I really don't have any insight on how to increase our revenue outside of what we're already doing.
Fair enough.
Council Stoddard. The other thing to look at is we've been working with Ray Lynn on making sure she understands the future growth of the department or the planned growth between fire station locations and personnel needed for it. So we are trying to get this information out to the council and to finance so they know what is coming up into the future. And all we can do is identify the issue and then work for a solution. But at least if you know that in 28 it's another station that's gonna start being worked on, being planned or built, and 29 there could be potentially more firefighters needed. At least we're identifying the future issues and the future needs so that it's out on the table. There's nothing being hidden. This is our needs and this is how we have to grow.
And my other point on that is, we as municipalities get used to the ARPA funds and all these other things, and they eventually run out. And we wanna make sure that we don't get backed in the corner and got this facility and nobody to, as an example.
Chief? Based on these numbers here, budget went up about $2 million last year. Have you visited with Ray Lynn on where $2 million is gonna come from?
Yes.
Do we have it?
I would let her answer that.
I'll say, so, $1 million of that came from property tax, so they did get an additional $1 million property allocated from last year to this year. So, that is why we are showing a revenue deficit in fire. There was a slight increase and one thing that this doesn't show, what I haven't shown yet, because the final contract numbers for the rural are not in, so I just have, I always budget the rural contract as no road, and then we've added the 6 personnel, so just covering those 2 things. So there's, the last number I saw was a little bit more than what I have budgeted. So there's, I would say fire is between $600,000 and $800,000 in a revenue deficit right now.
Have you, gotten preliminary preliminary numbers from the county? You have, so you have some rough estimate on where we're going.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Question maybe for Chief Perry. So we're talking about revenue, so the development fees, so for like the 10% for fire review on building plans, do you feel that that's adequate where we're at, or do you think it's time to increase those, or what's your thoughts on those?
That's a big question. It's challenging. We want to make sure that we are eventually or at some point coming close to a zero net as close to possible. But at the same time, we want to be careful not to raise our fees to challenge people to continue to grow or be here to help support support the infrastructure. I haven't sat with Ray Lynn to really go over those numbers just yet. I would say that there's always room for some improvement as we grow. I mean, it's a need to have, but again, it's a fine balance between too much and just enough. And so to answer your question, I don't have an answer for you at this time, but I'm going to get Ray Lynn.
I will say and just add that fire prevention and planning and zoning bring in fees that do not cover all of their budgets. And so building fees do cover those deficits and those revenues as well.
Anything else to present?
We just wanted to continue into fiscal year 28 priorities and fiscal year 29. Just to sum it up and close this out, as the city grows and we talk about increasing capacity, we still have a responsibility to make sure that our personnel have everything they need to to accomplish their mission with approaching 9,200 calls running out of 3 fire stations. Caldwell firefighters are amongst the busiest in the state. And that makes them more prone for injury and more prone for burnout. They go out there every day and they accomplish the mission. And as our community grows and relies more and more on the fire department, we want to make sure that they're compensated well, they have the best tools and equipment, the in-house training that we're trying to give them, and to basically make the community safer. As I relayed earlier, it's our goal to hopefully decrease our homeowners' taxpayers' insurance premiums by continuing those investments, and continuing to look in the future and get with this council and the mayor's office about our needs for the fire department. That's the end of our presentation. We'll stand for questions.
Okay. Any other questions?
Question of Ray Lynn. Okay, Mr.
Yep.
Mayor?
Mhm.
Ray Lynn, I'm looking down through this, this puzzle of stuff there. So somewhere right here where fire, down under city, fire, and budget year 2025 and 2026. This is kind of expanding on Councilor Allgood's question about the difference in 25 and 26. The difference in those two numbers there is about $1.3 million. So when you're talking about a $600,000 deficit, you're talking about the difference between what was generated in revenues and what's been budgeted is the $600,000 difference.
That is correct.
Other questions? Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate all you do. I know that you put in so much work and effort, and also all the firefighters are here as well. Appreciate your service and everything you do. Thank you so much. Okay, so next after that is going to cover City Hall, Mayor's Office, Mayor Admin, and City Council. So I'll turn over to Ray Lynn.
So you should have a couple pages on top of the big page with the property tax. Then you're going to go back to in just a minute. But just to talk about kind of the budgets that we have not talked about specifically. So City Council budget, as you know, if you didn't know, City Council has a budget. It has a separate department. We do budget for, cell phones. We budget for some office supplies, or if a computer goes out. So there's little things that we budget for, just to make sure that if something happens, that we can cover the cost that is either in this chamber or within everything that you guys do. So the biggest increase, because it did increase by that 11,000, is due to the pay increase that was voted on in 2023. So in that ordinance that was voted in 2023, there was an increase in 2024, and then a second increase for January 1st of 2026. And so I have recognized that increase starting in January. It also has the increased cost in health insurance of that 4%. But all of the other line items stayed pretty consistent. That included $2,500 for travel and meeting, and then there is $4,000 for special projects or donations. To kind of give you an example of what those were used for this year, you guys donated $1,000 to the firefighter stair climb, $1,000 for the Curie French statue. So those are kind of the same things that was used on. There's still a little, some funds left in there, so it hasn't been fully used, but that is the city council budget.
Really, do we, in the budget, is there anything for the vet gardens?
The what?
The vet gardens? Do we?
No, we don't have any specific line items for the veterans gardens. In the mayor's budget, it has decreased from the previous year, $7,000. This is also budgeted for the increase in the salary line item because of the ordinance voted on in 2023. One thing that we did change, with our new compensation policy that was enacted last year, we allow departments to, if they have budget available, and we allow them to get bonuses within, its performance bonuses specifically. And they do have to get approval for that, and it has a set dollar amount. And so we just move the mayor's performance bonus out of his budget, because it just, getting a $100 or $150 check is not a performance bonus. So we did remove that because it just could not be spread out among employees. And so departments are finding that budget within their current budget within salary savings. So. And just to be clear, it says it was moved into department budgets. We did not add specific dollar amounts to department budgets. This is, they have to look at, I review their budgets to see if there's salary savings or opportunities for salary savings so that they can pay out the bonus. It's not just a budgeted line item. So there was a decrease in travel and meetings from 20,000 to 15,000, and then a reallocation of some line items just to meet the needs of the mayor's office. So.
What does that mean?
What that means is that from subtracting from an office equipment line and moving it to another line, but not increasing or decreasing the budget. So just changing where things are budgeted. And then with the mayor's admin budget, there was an increase of 11,000, and that is due to the cost of COLA and health insurance. In that same thing, there was a reallocation of line items just to meet the needs. And one of the things, just for clarifying point, some of that reallocation is, for example, last year we had, for the lease that we have in the mayor's office, for vehicle lease, we had that under repair and maintenance vehicle, and we were doing budget transfers to actually move it to the lease line item. And so now that is now budgeted under the lease line item. So that is, it's budgeted where it should be, if that makes sense. So, any questions on either of those budgets? Okay. Community and employee relations budget. So this is the one that is separate, that is pulled out. There is a decrease of $18,110. So to kind of explain what is in this budget, so we have $75,000 that's set aside for the community relations, and we've set up an application process now that there's a form online that people can fill out, and then in August there's a committee that will review and score those applications, and then in October we will bring it to City Council to recommend approval for all of those disbursements. Within also the community and employee relation, we have 3 funded city events, 4th of July, Halloween, and Winter Wonderland. These are small amounts. The 4th of July is the largest at 10,000. Halloween is 3,000, and then Winter Wonderland is 2,000. So the Winter Wonderland is for the rental. We give a donation to Destination Caldwell for the porta potties. Yeah. We did remove break rooms.
We go back for just a second.
Yeah.
So like on the 4th of July, we also purchased fireworks. What's the additional 10,000 like for the 4th of July?
So we do flags. There's some setup and stuff like that we have to do for 4th of July. Can't remember it off the top of my head. Do you have other?
I think about half of this, the flags, the small flags that they hand out, so that's like 4 to 5, because they buy, I think it's like 15,000, 20,000 flags. That's the handout as they go down, so that's, I know, the majority of it, and then just like the, other things that go part of that 4th of July, a lot of that at the Memorial Park for garbage service and things of that nature.
And then we did remove the break room snacks for the budgeted line item, so it's no longer budgeted. And then, we did remove some of the employee relations and promotion, items to department budgets, so. This will now. And then City Hall is really, to operate and manage City Hall and City Hall Annex. And then, to pay for city general expenses that are not necessarily charged to one specific department. So within this, there is, and this does not include transfers, so we do have quite a few transfers out of general fund. This doesn't include that, and this number doesn't include that, and we did not change contingency. We still have contingency budgeted at $250,000. That number did not increase. What did increase within this was $50,000 for window tinting of City Hall. And this is more for heat regulation, like as you sometimes in this meeting room and in a lot of meeting rooms, they'll go from hot to cold and hot to cold. And any windows within the sun or in the shade, the room is either a lot hotter or a lot colder. And so we are working with a vendor to get the tent that doesn't necessarily show from the outside, but will help reduce the sun coming in or the cold coming in and have better temperature regulation. And so that will allow us to do the first and second floors. So. And then we did reduce the graffiti line item by $25,000 based off of the current usage. $65,000 for that budget instead of $90,000 is a more appropriate line item based off of the current usage. And then we did see a reduction in bank fees. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, we are now going to, we have been paying a lot of bank fees because when a customer uses a credit card for a building permit fee or, it's mostly building permit fees, we pay a merchant of 3%, and we were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so now we are putting that charge to the customer instead of paying it. So we will see a reduction in that cost. So, for city buildings, this is a separate division within the general fund. This number did not change too much. It's pretty consistent, but this is for the maintenance of the Veterans Hall and the Sweetwater building. There's been a little bit of a reduction, but most of those costs are pretty steady with what those repairs come in. And then we also have a division for the senior center. And so that item has stayed pretty steady as well. One thing to note from the senior center, they put a request every year, and we've seen a significant increase in the maintenance items they're requesting. Just this last year, we had to do quite a bit of repairs in the walk-in freezer. And so the current building is going to need some major repairs in the future. I've been working with Robin on some CDBG funds that will help with some ADA issues, but that will be minimal compared to the major needs within that current building. So I do think we need to develop a long-term plan to do with the senior center and how we can, especially as those costs increase. Those are all the budget items I wanted to go over, but I wanted to talk about property tax and kind of the general fund in general. So the first thing, so this worksheet should have been the third page in your packet. I kind of put together from 2020 to the current fiscal year, what the property taxes look like, where the calculations are, and then also when House Bill 389 was implemented, that impact to our budgets and really how significantly it has impacted the city of Caldwell's budget. And this number is conservative because House Bill 389 did a lot of things to change how property tax was calculated, and it did a lot of things not only with the preliminary levy rate, but then between the 90% to 100% on new construction and annexation, and then it put that 8% cap. So the very bottom number is if House Bill 389 did not go into effect, this is the number that we could have additionally levied. And it's pretty significant as it compounds over time, because this 2.3 million that's on here does not show the compounding of it, because that the first year it would have rolled to our base, and if we took the 3%. So what this shows is that really, you know, yes, there has been property tax savings. I'm not going to say there's not been property tax savings, but at the downside, it has really limited what the city has been able to gain within their budget, and it limits the decisions we are able to make with property tax. When I go to calculate property tax now, it's an automatic increase of the 3% because I know that the requests are growing so fast from all the department budgets, faster than 3%. So, you know, when I come to you and say, should we take this? It's not a decision anymore. I just am like, I automatically have to calculate it. Now, if it was something that you said no, then I'd be like, what budget do you want me to reduce then? Because that's what would happen. And, you know, because it's one of those things that it's not sustainable with the growth that we are really working with and the limitations within property tax. There's only so much that we can do, but I did want to just have that conversation with you guys that House Bill 389, you know, does have that compounding effect, and really that 2.3 number would be a lot higher because every year that goes into our base and keeps adding and adding and adding. So, and that's a very conservative number. It's not all the impacts. It's just changing what the preliminary levy rate would have been. So.
Question, Mr. Mayor, what are we doing as Caldwell to be a voice to the state for how this is affecting us? How are we addressing this?
So I know Raylan's gonna talk about some options we have to address it at our own level, but I know that so Caldwell is putting its voice with the other cities, and working together to see what can we come up with. So all the mayors of the cities in the valley, just meet together every month and kind of talk about things like this and trying to figure out what can we do. So I know that there's actually a meeting coming up in the near future for all the mayors and the county commissioners to discuss how do we approach the legislature, because we have tried and seems to fall on deaf ears quite often. And so they did create a committee, I can't remember, I don't know if you know the name, rather long, looking at housing affordability, things of that nature. Mayor Chadwick is on that from the city of Star, and then a number of legislators and other people in the housing community that are traveling the state to get information. And a big focus is on this with housing affordability. How is like a bill like House Bill 389 affecting that in the budget? It's kind of like, because like what Raylan said, you're pretty much forced, because I remember, and I'm sure Councilor Stoddard and Councilor Allgood, it was never a decision of, are we gonna take the full 3%? It was like, where are we at below that? And quite often the city did not take the full 3%. Now, and it kind of puts the council at a disadvantage because your hands are kind of tied, because you almost have to. Because if not, you're cutting police and fire somewhere. There are real needs on that. So it really takes away the ability for a city to kind of decide, okay, is it gonna be a 1% this year, 2.5%, or maybe nothing, depending on how your city's grown. But now with that hamstring of that 90% on new construction, you pretty much now have to take that full 3%, which goes to everybody, not just the new construction. And so it kind of really hurts the entire community on that. Where again, that's what the mantra we always hear: new growth paying for new growth. And it gets difficult where we literally can't, because we can only take 90% of the new growth value that came in. And so that puts that burden on the entire population. So it makes it difficult, but we are working together. And that is the question, is how do we there are certain legislators that just will not listen, or what about the ones that will, and how can we get through to them to see if they would look into House Bill 389. We've been told it's never gonna just go away, but are there things we could do to improve on it? And we've heard things of even worse. There's been we talked about the 8% max growth. They've been floating a 5% number. which would be just astronomically difficult for a city to do that. So it's just really tough, but working hard with the other mayors to just get together and try to form out plans. That's kind of where we're at right now.
So, no reflection on you, but that group hasn't come up with any answers yet, then is what I'm hearing.
So no, there's been discussion, and they've always gone to the legislature to try to convince them of, we're not wasting taxpayer dollars. We are trying to do the best we can. And I think that city governments, and this is no offense, I used to be in the state legislature. I know that Mr. Allgood was as well. If you want to see government inefficiency, the higher up you go, the less efficient you're going to see from a state level to the federal level. City I believe, does a pretty darn good job of controlling those taxpayer dollars. And so it's difficult from like a state level where they could improve on their efficiencies, I believe, quite a bit. Putting a burden on a lot of the cities of how do they do it, when I think they've governed themselves pretty well for many, many years. So it's been a difficult thing, and they've had thoughts and ideas, but it's been more of a singular approach. That's why they want to come in as a whole with the entire group and the entire Treasure Valley to see if that would make a difference. Because there's been proposals given, nothing's been done or listened to.
It's a typical example, I think, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Boyle, Mr. Harris, and Mr. Bedke, they don't have a clue how a city has to run. You have to come up with legislation.
Yeah, so it makes it very tough. It'd be nice to do a day in your shoes and kind of so they could see and that's the thing, is trying to educate them to be like, okay, this is the actual impact. And there's gonna be a breaking point, whether it's next year, 5 years, 10 years from now, this is not sustainable. And so you're gonna have these breaking points from different cities depending on their population and how they've grown. If you're kind of a city that isn't growing and smaller, it probably doesn't affect you too much. But if you're a city like Caldwell that continues to grow, like City of Star, they're growing beyond, in some areas, beyond that 8%. And so how do you keep up if your growth is beyond the number of what you can increase? It's literally impossible.
Maybe Mr. Rude could give us some insight too, with his experience at the legislature, on how to get that fixed.
So I know Raylene was gonna talk about some options that we have to look at and that once she kind of gets through all of this.
So within the property tax for fiscal year 26, if you just look on that, these are the preliminary numbers from the county. And so our base budget is the 29,333,000. 880 is the 3% calculation. New construction and annexation, those are the dollar amounts that we would receive. And then we get $254,000 in property tax replacement. And then we talked about the calculation from the State Tax Commission, changing the urban renewal close out from 80% to 90%. So that is the $442,000 that you see on line 9. And so that equals our total budget that we can levy in property tax for specific ongoing. That's not our general, because we also levy our general obligation bond. That's not included in here. And so it'd be $31,512,682. So that is what I have budgeted and allocated. On the worksheet, the bigger worksheet, it shows a little different number. It shows $31,767,502. So when we levy, the difference between the max budget, the 8%, is that $254,773, which is the property tax replacement. We don't levy that amount. It's not included in our, it's included in our 3% calculation in our base, but then we subtract it out because we don't levy that amount. It's just paid directly through the county to us. And so for allocation purposes, to allocate property tax, including the property tax replacement, that goes, I allocate all of that among all the different departments that receive property tax. And that allocation, you can see here of what each I have allocated for. This outlook I created a couple of years ago, and I just updated 26 in this fiscal year 26. And so the percentages change and every year are modified. And so even though it shows a percentage in 2027, doesn't mean that that's what it's going to be. These are all estimates for future years on future growth. And so those numbers change and they adjust, and it's not, it's looked at every year. I don't just say this is what someone automatically gets. I review the budgets, I review the allocations, I work with the mayor to say this is where we're at. These are the preliminary numbers that I think, starting in like March, this is what I think we have. And then when I do get the preliminary numbers from the county, then I update that. So when I got the preliminary numbers from the county, the first update in March did not include the 442,000, and my new construction was $400,000 off. And so when we allocated that additional 800,000 that I got from the preliminaries that I had not budgeted for, because fire is asking for those new positions, all that money went directly to fire, and so the percentages look a little off. But that's why you see growth in fire and not necessarily significant growth in so.
So, I mean, do you have a ballpark figure on our exposure to bonds, how much we have?
With our current bonds, so we have the currently that we levied for is 12 million that we levied for, and so that number every year is about $894,000 in a payment for property taxes that we have. This next spring we'll be levying for the additional amount, which then will add to that payment that we have to make. So as to future bonds or additional levies, we can definitely talk about that. So within the revenue deficit on the last page, I kind of talk about, I bring up, there's a lot of long-term solutions and looking at like short-term solutions as well. I will say what we're doing right now with using building fee / fund balance to cover police and fire revenue deficits is really a short-term solution. It's not something that we want to keep doing, and it's really not sustainable or even fair to those departments to say, hey, you have to come in and cut your budget because we can't find the revenue anywhere else. And so trying to look at ways to build revenue, to look at ways that, okay, what can we do? Now, there are some things that we can do in the short term. For example, we talked about a new fee increase. It's kind of an admin fee. That would be like an administrative charge to all fee processes, not including utility billing. If this was going to be something that you guys wanted us to put into place, the soonest we would be able to do it is in the start of October as a new fee. So after talking with Rochelle and like working through some of the processes, it's not going to be like an easy implement this all at once. It's going to take time for finance to implement it and put it into place. And so those revenue estimates, I don't know what they would be or even how much revenue that would bring in right away. So even if this is something the council wanted us to do, we could do it, but it would take some time to implement.
Raylan,
Yes.
you have a rough idea, if we were to do something like that, a rough idea how much it would generate in revenue?
I don't, like, I think it depends on the percentage. Like if we did a percentage base, I could look at that, but if we did a flat fee, then it would be the number of transactions. So I think it's the approaches, and I want to do a little bit of research to see which way would be easier for us to implement. So.
I think the other thing too, Raylan, is, and this would be Mr. Porter and Mr. Jenkins, our ratio on residential versus commercial is way off. It's like 2/3 resident versus 1/3 commercial. If we could get that back together where not necessarily that be even, but at least commercial industrial goes up, that does generate a lot more revenue too. But until that happens, we're gonna be stuck with this.
Yeah, and I when speaking like to, you know, what developments come in and stuff, I think, you know, that's one thing that I don't have any control over, and, you know, it's only how they're assessed, and,
It's not an easy thing either, but like I say, that's part of our problem, is that racial differential between residential and commercial industrial.
Yeah, and kind of touching on that, I appreciate Mr. and Mrs. Porter being here tonight, because you're spot on, like, and that takes time, right? But I think that they've done a great job, you know, the urban renewal that did Sunset, the relationships that we've been able to create. Like CBH Homes is a great example. You know, they're building their corporate headquarters in Caldwell because of that relationship that we've been able to establish with them. And when they are all done, and it's gonna take a number of years, but when they're all said and done, they will have 2 million square feet at their compound, and with a roughly $600 million value. And so that's where you start to see that to come into play. And so it's, you know, creating those relationships, bringing in, like, you know, the Fred Meyers, these others are great as well that add to it. But when you get like something like that, like $600 million, that is a lot of value coming into the city. And that's, again, commercial, industrial, starting to see those things coming in. So they've done like a great job and just continue to doing that to attract those.
My only point is we let it get so far behind that it's gonna take a while to get caught up, but if we're gonna solve these problems with, you know, having enough police, having enough fire, we've gotta get that back into something that's reasonable, that ratio.
Another option, though I know we haven't discussed it and it's not necessarily popular, is to levy foregone within our property taxes. I did not include it as part of the property tax budget because there's not been an indication to me that that's something we want to do. But this additional 1% does become ongoing, and it would be levied as part of our property tax this next fiscal year if that was something that you guys wanted and directed me to do. It does take a separate public hearing and public notice, and it can be part of our budget hearing. It just has to be noticed as it's up, you know, we are taking foregone and doing our budget hearing. So if that is something you guys wanted, I could do that. That would add an additional $317,675 to the budget if we were to take the full 1%. So.
Really, and that's probably the least popular of the decisions we have to make, but that's half of the deficit that you're saying the fire has.
And so fire has about a $600,000 revenue deficit. Police has about $1 million revenue deficit. So we're looking about.
At some point, we only have one well to draw from.
The reallocation of property taxes, I know we've talked about this a lot. Every year this happens, and I think it just is a very slow process because, you know, a lot of personnel are dependent, like, and when I say personnel, I mean positions are dependent on that property tax being funded at a certain level. And so if we start to reallocate large amounts, then it just takes over a year. So for example, this year, it's more about the growth, the additional amounts. You can see where, for example, airport went from 428 last year to 429. If we allowed that full percentage, you know, of it, and it would have been a lot more, but there's very small growth that doesn't even cover the increase in the COLA and health insurance. And so that expectation is it's going to be covered by fees. And so, you know, either not allowing those other departments property tax levy amounts to grow and reallocating that to police and fire. That can happen. It just takes time. Instead of essentially defunding departments, you know, it just takes time to not allow them the growth in the property taxes. That can also have a detriment on fees, and fees would be increased, and that would also have an impact. You know, I know, for example, with airport, we would see an increase in lease rates, and I know that's not a popular thing, but if there was a reduction in property tax, like that's the example. You know, if we reduce one, we have to increase others because the revenue has to come from somewhere. So those are kind of the examples. If that's something I can definitely work on that. It just is every year, it's just a budget, change.
So I think with that too is taking into account the level of service that you want and expect out of each of those departments. Because for example, if you are reducing that, because I truly believe that the positions we have are needed. I don't think we have, fluff out there for positions that aren't doing any work. So so again, if you're like, okay, we need to take money from X to cover Z, now the level of service on X is gonna drop. And so that's where you kind of take that into play, is are we okay with having parks that don't look very good? Because we had to take some of those employees away to make up for deficits in other areas. So, what level of service, I know we talk about that with streets a lot, but really any department, you could take a set, what level of service do we expect? Do we want building permits turned around in 10 days like we do now, or we want them done in 2 months? I would say we don't want them in 2 months because that's gonna drive people away. And so again, it's what level of service do we want to maintain in each of those? And that's where these numbers come into play, where we feel we have that right balance to provide an adequate level of service in each of these departments.
The next one that, I have been doing some research into payment in lieu of taxes. This one is not something that I think can be just, this is what we want to do right now, because these are partners within our community that I think there needs to be some research done by me, as well as like a full assessment of do we want to start charging these? Is this something that makes sense? Because sometimes when you're charging it, it's because they're getting the services, but sometimes that exemption is there for a reason. And so I think further discussion and research needs to happen before we start implementing those. And they just take some time on my part, which, so hopefully in the fall I can start doing that. But those are really separate contracts with separate entities where we record payment for services for police and fire. If for properties that do not pay property tax. Because of the exemptions they have. So, and then the last is really looking at property taxes and different ways to increase those property taxes. I do think that some of this would require additional discussions and maybe not being able to be executed this year, but maybe further down the road. But especially whether or not, you wanted a levy override to be on the November election. There's a lot of time because those requests have to be in by August, and so there's not much time to make that decision or get things together. And so my recommendation would be to wait until, if we were to move down that road, to wait until May, the next election. And so that's why I said additional conversations. But there's 3 levies that we can go for. That are not bonds, they're just levy overrides. So there's a temporary levy. This is similar to what Canyon County just got. It just needs a simple majority of the 50% plus 1. There's a max of 2 years on this levy. Usually the need for this is specific projects or capital requests. It's hard to do a temporary levy and put ongoing personnel costs on that because, if you don't get that levy again, then, more significant decisions would have to be made, such as layoffs or something to that effect. I think that's what we're trying to make sure that we don't have in the future. It's called a 0.004 levy rate override, and this is where we can make, our levy rate go up to that 0.004. It's not much increase, but we can do that, but it would need 60% of voters' approval on doing that. And then the last one is the ongoing rate override for a specific dollar amount. And that we would ask, that would need a supermajority. So those are I have really looked at all the different options. I've been discussing with both police and fire on what fees that they have within their budgets that we're not implementing or haven't been really pushing hard for, to see if we can, make sure that we're pleased that if we're charging, or if people are working overtime for special events, that we are getting the contract and asking for reimbursement on those, so that we have that that additional cost is being covered by revenue. So looking at different options, it's just, there's not a ton of options to make $1.6 million disappear within it. So, tough decisions and tough conversations, and, so if you let me know what kind of direction you would like to go, I can kind of move forward with that, and we can work from there, so.
And this is, obviously planning, for the future. So we do have a balanced budget this year. It's been presented, but again, it's, what if, building permits do drop next year? They're going really great this year, and we know we're gonna be covered. We're very comfortable on that. But what if it does drop? So again, this is future planning, looking at it now rather than waiting until the crisis is completely here in front of us. And so these are just, again, options to look at, consider, and how do we go forward and to make sure that our needs are met in the future.
So, Mr. Mayor, to be clear then, for this year, we're making up those deficits, specifically fire and police, with building fees and general fund. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That is correct. That is how the budget would be balanced, yes. So we're looking at all revenues and expenditures that go, all revenues and expenditures that go into general fund are used to balance general.
And one thing too, and sorry, Linda, I don't know if you're gonna bring this up or not, is, again, we feel it's too quick, because for the November ballot, to put that on there. But, and Justin had brought this up, if I'm not mistaken, about putting the question, because you can always put a question there, is, would you support a ongoing levy override of so much to support your police and fire? So you can always put that on there as well and see what is the response. And obviously, it's a lot easier to say yes when you don't have to pay for it right then, but it could give a general sense of the people, okay, this will increase this much, would you support that to provide support for your police and fire? So that is an option that you could put on the November ballot if the council wanted to just kind of get some feedback and see what is the general consensus.
What is the prevailing wisdom on that recommendation? That's the first I've heard of it, so what, is that a recommendation that this is a good thing to do? Is that a recommendation that's just something we could think about? Has that proven well in other municipalities? What do we need to know about that besides it's a possibility?
So I don't know, I know that I've seen it on the state level. I don't know if other cities or jurisdictions have done something of that nature. So I think, it's got pros and cons on both, but I think a pro is that it shows that, okay, the city council is trying to get your feedback, the public, of the situation. First, maybe brings to the forefront, they know the situation that the city faces and that the city is looking at ways to remedy it, and that the city wants the input of the public to see if they would support that or not.
Well, I think it depends on how you position it too, because, I was king for a day, I definitely would use HB 389 as part of the problem why we're in this predicament. It's how you position it and what kind of facts you have behind to justify what you're asking for. So I think you should include that if we ever go for it.
So when do we need a decision on whether we put that question on the ballot, and then what other discussions and input and mind melding do we need to do to understand whether that's something we want to do?
Probably not till August, I would guess.
Yeah, for the ballot question is till August, and so I think that one we could have further discussion and clarification on. And maybe, I don't know if Oscar's here, maybe present some question outlines so that you guys can figure out which ones you would prefer on the ballot. I'm working with the city attorney to do that. And then being able to put that forward before the deadline in August and have it be probably a city council agenda item is my recommendation on that one. So there would be further discussion on that. As to recommendations today for this budget for 2026, because our public hearing is August 18th for the budget. And so within that discussion for the budget is also gonna be a public hearing for fees. So for guidance for me, especially when it comes to whether you want me to start having the admin fee and doing research and be able to put that in for the fee resolution, and then foregone, I think those decisions I would like to know if possible, or recommendations on those two things. The other items I think would warrant further discussions. You know, the future levy request, like I said, I would recommend probably a workshop in January if that was something the city council wanted to do after we asked the question even. And then with payment in lieu of taxes, that is, I'm already gonna be researching that. And so when I get more information and more of a recommendation of here's what I think we should do, I would bring it to city council.
I realize no decisions are made in a workshop, but if we're considering that, I would definitely wait on doing anything with foregone, because if our population said yes, they were willing to allow for an extension in our levy rate or a incremental change in our levy rate, we might not need the foregone. But that would be my thoughts. Why I wouldn't want to do both. I wouldn't want to go foregone and then turn around and ask them for more. If we get an answer that no, absolutely not, we may be forced to do things like foregone. And that may be part of our discussion with the community when we talk about this, but that would be, again, more information helps me to know what we as city council should recommend to our city.
I think that's one of the benefits too. It allows you to know, okay, they don't wanna go this way, so now we have these other options that we need to start looking at on that. And I think also, if you were a salesman, you're trained to always try to get a yes out of the person, right? Before you ask them to buy whatever you're buying, you want them to say yes to something else, because they're in that kind of mindset, right? And so that's where kind of if you ask them, would you support this? If they say yes, hopefully when it does come back, they may remember, oh yeah, I remember seeing this, and yeah, I said I'd support it, so I'm gonna go ahead and vote yes for it, because I said I'd support it. Not everybody's gonna do that, but that's the thought, is it gets in their head of would you support it or not, with the hope that they would remember that they initially said that they would. Even though they're the only ones that know that, because they were the only ones in the ballot box, but.
Mr. Mayor, also I think we have to see the numbers, right? Because it may take more than one of these to rectify this situation.
Yeah.
So it may take two. So, or hopefully not three, but it could take a couple of them. The fees in the foregone or the fees in the levy rate increase, I mean, it may.
Which is why the next thing on your agenda becomes critical as well.
So we can move on to talking about the city project. I wanted some clarification on both of these because they are both in the budget. And so, you know, before we finalize the budget and, recommendations on I know there were some questions on the property tax reduction, similar to the circuit breaker, and then the city building fund. So we have about $750,000 set aside for the property tax reduction. We still have not got a final number from the county, but it's working with that timeline. If we are going to implement a program like that, it has to be in the budget, and there's an ordinance that would come forward afterwards, so.
Mr. Mayor. So to me, here we are discussing how to raise more money.
Right.
But yet we're talking about giving money back, and so, and that's happened a couple things in the city council too, but I guess, yes, that would be a great thing to do. Fire down 1.6, 1.8 million. So I'm not sure why we're trying to do that, plus then ask the public to pay more.
Right.
So this is one-time money, that's the reason why. So every year we look at the fund balance, we wanna be at the 30%. So with this last year, that increased, so we are above. So this doesn't take into account the fund balance expected in FY '26 from the building permits to help fund some of those others. This is FY '25 fund balance that is in excess, so it's pushed us so many $1 million above what we want as our fund balance. So it's taking that one-time money, and not just leaving it in there to grow and grow and grow as it did for those years, but utilizing that in a way for one-time projects. So obviously with police and fire, those positions, that's ongoing expenses. So this is similar to, like the improvements like the pump track, where we had that fund balance. So it was a one-time project, because that was in excess of what we want our fund balance to be. We had too much fund balance. And so that's where we are now with FY '25. And the majority of that came in, I think a lot of it was interest rates that we received on cash balances that were higher than we expected. So those are revenues that came in. And so that's in excess of fund balance to get us back to where we want to be for a healthy fund balance.
Except, Mr. Mayor, we've also been told that we cannot continue to fund police and fire out of general fund. We could do that for one more year maybe if we don't give this back, if we let it grow. Or on the other hand, the apparatus the fire department needs that can't be bought with impact fees, if it's replacing one, is $1 million. Am I not correct, Chief? You're sitting here still? That's nearly one whole fire engine. And we're gonna need impact fees, probably, for all of the capital for Station 4, I'm guessing. But what about Station 2 and Station 3, as those apparatus get old? And I think we're sending mixed messages. We're telling our community, we have too much money. Will you approve an increase in your levy rate? I have a real problem with it. I would love to give people money back, but I think the other thing is it ends up being so little per person that it really isn't gonna make a dent in their egg prices.
Yeah, so this is why it would be focused on 65 and over.
I understand, it still isn't gonna amount to,
So it could amount to $300 to $600.
that's a lot of money, but still, it's gone in a month.
Yeah.
It's gone in less than a month.
Well, I mean, it depends. For my family, yes, because I have 3 kids at home. But if you and say it's just you or you and your wife and you're 65 on Social Security, that could be your entire month of Social Security payment.
But I still, as unpopular as it may be, am not excited about that, and I'd rather move that out of the budget and continue to have it in general fund, and maybe even move it into a designated fund that isn't appropriated necessarily, sorry, Chief, but set it aside for a future fire apparatus without appropriating it, so if we had to move it again, we could, but earmark it, we've got to look ahead. We already know that if we don't start planning for the personnel, we're gonna have an empty fire station. But what about the apparatus? I realize that's impact fees for the new ones. We got a lot of aging equipment too.
And so the question would also be, is that the same thought on the city building fund? Because those are two separate. The total was it 3, how much?
The city building fund was $3 million. And so this would be a separate capital fund that would bring before you a resolution. And so it's not for maintenance items, or it's for larger items. And my plan is with this building fund, it would be either for a building replacement, like such as the library or senior center, bringing those together, or major renovations such as the police roof, or granted, the police roof's not gonna be budgeted in here, but those things that we can start setting aside money, having, one-time transfers into there to set aside money for those larger projects, so that when they do come up, we are prepared for them, instead of just coming out of fund balance that may or may not be there.
I would almost rather, if we're talking 3.75 million, I'd rather we do maybe 2 million towards a potential future building fund and take the 1.75 and put it to public safety, future needs that are capital. Because those are huge. Every time we get into those purchases, they're huge purchases. And we're going after general fund again, and it's an ongoing struggle. I think it's a good idea when you have this excess money to say, let's set some aside, because if it's not appropriated, we can always go back to it later. Am I wrong? if we had to do something different. We've done that a number of times with projects. But I'd rather earmark it differently because I think the expense for public safety is just astronomical. I mean, just look at these numbers before us. It's the majority of our budget.
So one thing I will say is once we transfer into capital funds, we usually do not transfer out of capital funds. So if that's the direction that the council wants, if we were doing the 1.7 million to police and fire, I just want clarification. Do you want it to go to the police and fire capital funds and fund those capital funds, or do you want it to stay in general fund until something's been appropriated?
For I'm sorry, Chief Ingram's not here, but our fire chief is here. Those expenses, we could burn 1.75 million
Very
in
quickly.
one sitting. We could set them down and it would all be gone.
Yes.
And so I don't see us having to give it back. I really don't. Sorry, go ahead, Harry.
Oh, I was just going to say on building capital fund, I think we're pretty certain that we'll be building an airport terminal in 2027.
A tower?
Yep, tower, yep, sorry. And we will have a portion of that. It's not a surprise, it should be in our budget now. I don't know what our portion will be yet, but it'll be significant.
The last I heard it was over $1 million.
So, I mean, we know that's coming, got a rough idea how much it is. We need to have money there when that happens. Can I go back?
Whatever you would like, yeah.
Correct me if I say anything wrong. I don't want to put anything on that's wrong. But if my memory serves me right, this would be the third year that we're approving budgets that are over revenue.
I would say this is the second year. I believe when the urban renewal closed that we were balanced, I recall. So
I'm not positive of that, but
I can go back and look.
Yeah, so that's, it's just a bad habit to make, approving budgets that are over revenue. And when we are counting on things like building permits and sales tax to make up for money that we don't have, that's very, very risky. Am I correct?
That is correct.
A slight change in the economy could mean we're either laying off or not hiring emergency services personnel because we're operating on that fine wire. On a general year, how fast does our capital fund grow? About how much money hits capital fund every year? The police and fire, I'm just police and fire.
The only revenue that goes into police and fire capital fund is the sanitation franchise fee, which is they each get about $150,000 to $170,000 a year.
So when you're talking about buying $1 million piece of apparatus, that's a whole bunch of years if you bought nothing else.
It's already aged out by the time we've saved up for it, Chief.
So, and then we switched to a wonderful city attorney. But our cost for that went way up, right?
That is correct.
So we're absorbing that, and that's general fund as well.
That is correct.
So we know with just police and fire, we're between 1.6 and 1.8 over budget. That's not including whatever happens with the animal shelter, city attorney,
The city attorney is budgeted,
okay?
and it is part of that general fund balance that I gave you.
It's tax dollars?
So the way the city attorneys, it's part of the general government. And so about 450,000 is covered between sales tax, franchise fees, and, those are the major, and a little bit of property tax. And then the remaining amount is charged to all the special revenue and enterprise funds coming back to general fund.
So what I'm getting at here is and it's probably not popular. But I would encourage us to say, for instance, the fire department, which, don't shoot me, chief, or nothing, but they're over about $600,000. So if we said, chief, we love you, but don't spend $550,000 on a storage facility right now, you're balanced. We don't have to go anywhere else. We don't have to ask the taxpayers for any more money. Fire department is balanced. And we do similar with anything else in the general fund, police, whatever. I realize everything you have on the list is important, but I'm really against going to the taxpayer for more money. I feel like we need to, at this point, I mean, Ray Lynn's got some things to work on. For instance, I'm really a fan of taking up those costs on credit cards, et cetera, things like that. But I feel like there's things we can do without pushing forward a budget that's over revenue. I really think we need to get closer to that dollar amount. As we're talking about, our fund balance has a little extra money in it, but that little extra money has been going down every year. The little extra money we had 2 years ago is less than the little extra money we have this year. That number's going down every year. And if we keep budgeting for more money than we're bringing in, pretty soon we're going to be in a mess. And like I said, already at this point, if our economy changes, we could be in some serious situations. So anyway, what I'm saying is, at the end of the year, if we have money left over, we build the chief storage unit. And the same way with police and anything else that you guys figure out that we might do. But there's a lot of times at the end of the year, we do a budget amendment because we didn't budget enough for this or that. But that's at the end of the year. When we go into a budget starting the year knowing we're over, I have difficulty with that. So anyway, that's where I'm going.
So, just a question, and I don't know if it's for Ray Lynn or for anybody, but what did they do with those impact fees they were going to build that storage apparatus with? Because impact fees can't be used for anything. It's very limited in what impact fees can be used for.
Well, no, I'm only talking about stuff that would come out of the general fund.
Okay, so the $550,000 for the logistics facility was almost entirely funded by impact fees, it said in the
Right.
presentation.
There is other things in here that we can consider. I'm just saying that I'm not gonna vote for a budget that's $1.6 million over what we're bringing in. It's just too dangerous. Last thing we want to do is say we can't rehire an employee, or we can't hire new employees because we're on a budget. So I feel it's important that we get ourselves very close to what our revenues are.
Might get you unelected too.
Oh, that would break my heart.
So, Lynn, as far as operations go then, like salaries and operations, that is funded by those mechanisms that are safer, are those, lack of a better word, balanced? Because some of these things that we're talking about spending on are one-time expenses that are budgeted for, that are coming out of a general fund balance in order to sustain our ongoing growth. I know the folks were asking for some things that were expensive, but only one-time expenses, and so those weren't coming out of a general fund balance. They were what would be coming out of a capital, or not, well, some of it was capital, but some of it
Some of the requests out of capital are going to, they're not one time, they're ongoing, such as the software. That is an ongoing expense, and that entire contract for 5 years is $2 million. And so once I started talking with the deputy chief about that, it's something that I can't just have in capital because it's not a one-time expense. I try to move ongoing expenses to the operating budget. So that has taken some further discussion with the chief, which is next week. It's not, I haven't had, like, we've talked about it, but it hasn't officially moved and come up with a solution yet. The 1.6 million is within the general fund operation, so that is salary, that is, building operation, so for fire and police, it is not necessarily capital requests, there's not these specific transfers within the capital, that are happening, they are within there, it's, you know, them funding at full staff, it's the new positions, it's the, it's those things, it's not the capital requests that are causing those overages.
Okay, so that's my concern, and that's where I continue to struggle to understand how all this works, because different things are funded from different sources. And so the deficit is coming from something that we couldn't pay for out of impact fees or out of general fund balance, not general fund balance, but so how do we make that up? Do we just lay off a bunch of people so that we can pass a budget that is within our revenues?
No, if you look at the budgets item by item, a lot of that stuff, even though it's one time, is still out of their operations budget. So if, you know, their salary, obviously, police and fire is the biggest portion of their budget. But, and again, Raylene, correct anything, I don't want to say anything incorrectly, but there's still a lot of one-time things in everybody's budget. And so it's basically a priority situation. I would never advocate getting rid of personnel. We need more, not less. But the last thing I want to happen is for us to end up in a situation where we're forced to do something with less because we put ourselves in a situation where we can't meet our needs.
Mr. Mayor, so based on that, since we don't have it all in front of us tonight, I'm sure Raylene wants more stuff to do, but why don't we get a list of what could be, rather than guessing what could be, so we can make a better decision. How about
That'd be wonderful, yeah.
I can definitely work with both police and fire to come up with a list, if that's what you guys would want.
I have a question. So to make up that 1.6 million, going back to what Councilor Williams said about the property 65 and over, if we decide not to do that, then will that $750,000, can that go towards that deficit?
It can, but it is only one-time money, which means that
For
we're
this
using
budget, I mean,
one-time money for an ongoing expense. It's not going to be there next year. And we've now, so currently the way I have general fund balances is I'm using current revenues to balance the general fund. I'm not using any fund balance to balance the general fund.
so I keep hearing every single meeting that if we approve this build, we're gonna have all this property tax in a year. And so sooner or later, we should be coming flush with money from all this property tax. But I realize that you can't predict that. But my question is, for this budget, could that go towards that deficit? And maybe we discuss cuts next year, or is doing cuts the only way we can make that work?
I guess I'm kind of confused on your question because I've already applied the property tax to police and fire. Like, is your question like more, are you
No,
wanting
the
to-
rebate that we're talking about.
Oh, the property tax rebate?
Yeah.
So if we were to apply that, yes, it does reduce that 1.6 million, but then it reduces fund balance. It uses fund balance instead of current revenues. So it's just a different funding source, but then next year we'll still be behind.
Right. I understand that. I'm anticipating that we're gonna start collecting more property tax. I don't know that that's the case.
So that's not necessarily, so kind of with our property tax and how it functions, it's a budget based, so there's only so much we can grow at one time. It's not based off of, the levy is based off of what is coming in, and the new construction value is based off of that. But once we've added it to the tax roll, the budget doesn't grow unless we've added, like we keep adding
I understand.
because of new
So
construction.
the question is though, on this rebate, if we decide not to do that, we can apply that to the 1.6 that we're missing, which means we have to cut 850,000 or come up with that amount.
So the 1.6 deficit is already covered in this year's budget. That's what I'm saying, I wouldn't have to, you guys can cut the property tax rebate, it's just gonna stay in fund balance. I've already covered the 1.6 within current revenues, I'm using building fund revenues, which are current revenues, instead of fund balance. So it's already covered
So we're
to make it a balanced budget.
So the balance, or the budget is balanced, we're not behind?
So the budget is balanced, but if we look at, because police and fire, based off of our resolution, quite a long says, if police and fire, are good with their budgets and they come in under, their revenues come in over their expenditures, they get to bring that fund balance. But if their expenditures are over their revenues, then we track a negative fund balance and they owe the general fund. Many city council ago passed that resolution, and so until that resolution is undone, we track and police and fire are held accountable for their budgets that way. And so if their budget, their expenditures come in less than their revenues, then they retain that fund balance that they can use to transfer to their capital fund or use for one-time items. But if, right now, because the revenue is not as much as their expenditure, it's not balanced, then they're automatically going to keep going further and further negative. Police is already last year negative $1 million. Fire is negative 33,000. So after fiscal year 25, which is still going to occur, they're still going to get further. Each year, it's becoming further and they're not retaining that fund balance.
So they're borrowing.
They're borrowing from the general fund.
Even though they underspent their budgets.
That is correct. Because the revenue is not coming in, the revenue has been less than their budgeted amount.
So when they made their original budget, they anticipated a certain amount of revenue that they didn't hit. So they're under their budget, but they didn't get the revenue. So they're borrowing from the general fund, and then they have to pay that back.
That is correct.
Essentially.
Essentially, as like either that's us covering it with a general fund transfer or them being, their revenue is coming in more and.
Well, I feel like when it was our first year of council, at least for us, that the fire department had borrowed money or something from like the cemetery or somebody, and they had to pay it back like $700,000 or something.
We did have some internal loans. When I first started, there was internal loans between funds. So with that, those come before city council, those are kind of separate. And we track those and interest is paid on those to pay back those funds. That is not what this is. We don't charge police and fire interest. It's just one fund tracking those balances.
So what you're saying right now is that they have created a budget that's under the projected revenue, I guess, but it's gonna be made up for in the general fund?
So they've created a budget. Their revenues are less than their expenditures. For police, it is less, their revenues are less by $1 million. And for fire, it's between 600,000 and 800,000.
Okay, so the 1.6
That 1.6 number,
behind is from this year, not projected for,
that is correct. So that doesn't include.
so that's what they owe,
25 or
basically,
24.
right? That's what they owe, the 1.6 million?
I think
General
the
fund.
goal is, to be fair to those departments, the goal is to get the revenue to match the expenditures so that if they come in with their expenditures less than revenue, that they can retain that fund balance.
So this resolution that you're talking about, is there a benefit to changing that for these kinds of things?
I think it's based off of direction from council of whether or not you want to hold those departments separate, or there's pros and cons to both. And I think I would want the chief's perspective on both of those as well, but it's one of those things, do they want to retain the fund balance once we do get this revenue deficit figured out, or is it, would they rather have it to where it's just part of the general fund and they get a certain amount?
So if you give us a list of the things that could potentially be cut from whatever, then we just, let's say we decide, we come up with $1.6 million, then police and fire are, they're even, basically, with what they owe the city, and now they just start over,
And I
basically, right?
I think it's important too, and I know we're gonna put a lot of focus on police and fire, but I would say, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the majority of city departments are pretty similar. Planning and zoning, not to pick on Robin, but I used to work in there obviously, and they never bring in the fees to cover all their expenses. So Parks and Rec, you could say the same thing. We have, people out there mowing lawns, trimming, taking care of the parks. The fees that we charge when people do rent the parks never is gonna amount to the cost it takes to take care of those things.
So do they have to pay back the general fund?
So those are covered in the general fund from the property tax, general fund expenses on that. So, and guys, police and fire is the same, right? Water is much different. We get to charge people for their water, and so we're able to make that money in those enterprise funds, but we don't, when Chief Daniels firefighters go out and rescue somebody from a river or put out their fire at their house or do CPR to bring them back to life, they don't leave them a bill or send them a bill the next week. Like with our water and our sewer, things like that. And it's kind of like, so again, it's providing those services. Again, there's the majority of the departments, human resources, finance, the mayor's office, the council, that we don't charge fees to collect that back to make up for that. So that's where property tax comes into play. So I know police and fire, I wouldn't say it gets picked on a lot, but focus is on there.
Okay, so I do have a question about fees though. So if I'm understanding this correctly, that fire covers like the jail, the courthouse, county buildings,
Like providing services
Yeah.
to them.
right? But they don't charge for it.
Well, they don't charge anybody, right, when they go out and provide their services.
Charge, but I think the question is
But the property tax from
Well,
those?
no, well, let me,
taxes.
right, exactly, because they don't pay property tax to the city, right? So in addition to that, they charge us for their dispatch, plus they're charging us another $100,000 or whatever coming up. Is there a way then now to create a fee for that then, if they don't,
That would be similar to the payment in lieu of taxes.
what?
Payment in lieu of taxes.
Payment in lieu of taxes that I talked about, that, looking into more options and coming back later on.
Because, and not to, like, I'm not trying to create a problem, but like with the hotel coming up, right? Like, they also don't pay property tax, so is that another consideration for services?
Pay property tax, so they're not paying property tax on the land.
Or on their bill?
But they do pay property tax on the improvement.
So, but the county does not, right, on their buildings?
That is correct. The county does not, because just like we don't pay property taxes on our buildings.
Okay, because I thought I heard the police chief say that they were gonna start charging for things they have not charged for before, security and things like that. So, fire, is that something you're looking at exploring? Or do you know yet, or?
There was an ordinance passed, I think, or to have a mechanism to charge for standby, have some billing mechanisms in, but finance doesn't have the mechanism yet.
A lot of that is like for repeat offenders. So like if you're going out
Nuisance
to
alarms.
a nursing home 10 times a day, okay, the first 2 maybe are free, but you're gonna pay us this much for these additional, because you don't have the adequate staff on hand to take care of it.
Well, I guess my thought on that is if they're gonna continue to charge us for services, like dispatch, even though they have our 911 funds, that maybe it's something we look into to provide services for their county buildings that are not paying property taxes.
Is definitely something that I'm doing research on to see what options are available, and then
And again, the reverse is we don't pay property taxes to Canyon County. So are they gonna then come and ask us for payment in lieu of taxes as well for their portion? Now typically, the city taxes are higher in Boone County, but again, we do own property as well. So obviously the building we're in now, the police station, all the fire stations. So there is that as well, that are they looking at payment in lieu of taxes from us also?
So it's a hostage situation then.
Was this deficit discussed during your negotiations with the fire department? And they didn't care or what?
so I don't know if we can really talk about what happened in negotiations, but,
I mean, that's a big item.
Well, I mean, they absolutely cared, but I don't think they asked for anything above and beyond what the city, is offering the rest of the clubs.
So, can I elaborate a little bit?
Yeah.
So the ordinance that Ray Lynn was talking about that got passed a long time ago that created fund balance for the police and fire. So I was in the police department when that passed. And the purpose for that was, back in those days, we always had money remaining at the end of the year. And so come about September or August, if you didn't spend the money you had remaining, it went back to the city hall general fund. So it was a big spending spree, you know, let's stock up on everything because we're gonna have to give the money back if we don't spend it. So it was determined that police and fire would have their own general fund, and if we got to the end of the year and we had salary savings or whatever else, instead of giving it back to City Hall, that would stay in the savings of the police department. It was an incentive to save money rather than have to give it back. And so the opposite of that, which is what we're in now, what I don't even think was contemplated at that time when we made that ordinance. I don't know, there's a lot of different, on the fees, for instance, alarms and things like that, the police department has done that for years. It's not very much money. It doesn't generate a ripple, really. It's small.
We may want to reconsider that ordinance though, because the perception that it's giving the community is that misperception that they're overspending their budget.
Well, and you're right, because again, the circumstances were very different.
They were very different, and so, I would suggest you look at that. But I would also suggest you get a direction on that tax rebate tonight too, because if what Chris is saying is true, and we are as risky as we are, we better have more in fund balance in case we do hit on rocky times 6 months into this. If this is only the second or third year that we're doing this, we're in a lot of uncharted waters for a lot of reasons. This House bill is only one of them that we've talked about tonight.
And, I'm sorry, but, you know, we were discussing whether it was 2 or 3 years that we were over, but 3 years ago, we were using a lot of ARPA money.
yes.
That now we're continuing to have to make up for. And so we're digging ourselves out of a kind of a hole, as Councilor Static was talking about. We lived on that ARPA money for quite some time, and we're having to make up for that as well. Anyway, I don't want to sound like doom and gloom, but I want to be careful.
I agree, I appreciate that wisdom.
That was a big number too, so.
So if I were giving you a direction, obviously I'm a no on the rebate.
And again, we're not making any decisions, but I believe a capital fund is important. We know we have the airport terminal, I keep saying terminal. Tower and things. We know those things are coming, so we need to be aware, ready for them.
So with that, because like I said, there's about 3.7 million. So our fund balance is right around just under 14 million. Is that correct? Like that 30%?
About 30%, yeah.
So this is obviously in excess of that. So options are you could let it ride, and it stays at 18 million dollars. We could put it all into a city building fund, capital building fund. We could put a portion of that in there and the portion into one-time, again, realizing the recommendation is definitely one-time expenses on that. So is there any thoughts on?
I agree with Chris on the airport tower for sure. I imagine Scott can get us a number fairly quickly. Clearly it could go up if we're chosen. If we're not chosen, then we go to infinity, but I'm not opposed to putting something into a building fund. Because not only are police and fire important, but also where our people work. It's as important. People need a comfortable, safe place to work as well. So I'm not opposed to putting money into a building fund. Whether it comes out of the general fund or not, either we need to keep a list of what we have coming up, but I think putting it into a building fund assures us that that money will be spent on that, and I believe it's 10%, am I wrong on the tower?
So it's either 10 or 5, depending
10 or
on,
5.
they're hoping to get that 5%, which would be the 1 million. If it's only a 10%, or if it's a 10%, we have to provide the next, roughly 2 million
So
on that.
again, preparing for the future, we know that's coming, at least we hope.
Yeah, and there's,
And regardless if it doesn't come, our building still needs some care.
yeah, and there's multiple, like I said, not just, I mean, obviously the airport tower is important, so it's library, senior center that we discussed about, a lot of these buildings are really crumbling. And so there's, if it's not, if that doesn't happen, doesn't get any approval, there's still other areas to put that in.
I agree.
So,
And one more thought on that increased fund balance, where we're struggling to find revenues. We've already said that interest revenue, even though it's not an ongoing revenue, it's not a bad source of revenue. And revenue on $3.75 million is no small chunk of cash. So until we do spend it, I think there's, again, I struggle with putting a question on the ballot. You want to increase your levy rate, here's some money back in the meantime. I'd rather we keep it in the bank.
And we could always do it later.
We could always do
The
it later.
budget is really great at the end of the year. I mean, it's not completely off the table, it's just not dedicated at the moment, right?
Well, that's all I had tonight, in case I
Sure, it's perfectly clear.
But I'm hoping to have the budget book finalized and out to everybody middle of July to review before the budget hearing in August. But if you guys do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
any other discussion or questions or comments?
No, I would just say this, by keeping that 752, we don't know what's gonna happen with the contract discussion. Obligating it as to happens from that, and now we don't have that money.
Okay, so thank you so much, appreciate the time, I know that this is extra on top of what we usually do, and a huge thank you to all the staff, but especially to Raylyn and her department, and especially her, Rochelle is here also, and just what they've done, as you know, their new person starts in July, so that'll be great, but, lots of putting the camera on both ends, so we appreciate all the work and effort, we wouldn't be able to do this without them, so thank you so much. And with that, we will end this workshop at this time.
Thank you.